Hello and welcome to this installment of Vox Machina. As your narrator, I'll be bringing fantastic works of fiction from the page to your eardrums. Uploads will be posted weekly, so be sure to subscribe and hit the alerts bell to be notified when new installments are available. Got a story you think deserves the Vox Machina treatment? Let me know in a comment and you might just hear it in a future episode. Thanks for listening and on with the show. How to Train Your Malfoy by Fencer X. Episode 14. Harry didn't like one bit that Draco had chosen now of all moments to suddenly develop his own savior complex, but he had to admit the sight of Draco charging down the labyrinthine hallways of the Essence Room, taking spellfire in every colour of the rainbow straight to the chest and having it cascade off a shimmering shield of black scales while he returned his own snarled confringos and stupefies was kind of thrilling. He hadn't seen Draco actually duel since second year. Well, arguably he'd seen him duel just a few days prior in that very same pensive memory. And they'd neither of them been terribly good back then, but this was a different beast altogether. Draco was, as professed, out of practice, but what he lacked in finesse, he made up for with sheer raw power. It was like he was channeling every spell he was hit with back into his own arcane well, bolstering his own magic with that of the Unspeakables rallying against them as they charged forward. Harry wondered just how much of the Blackblood's abilities he'd actually be able to harness if he really tried, and he suspected Hermione, who was all but openly gaping at his prowess, was wondering the same. No wonder the Department of Mysteries was so eager to get him back under their thumb. With proper training, and under the heavy yoke of an imperious curse, he stood to be quite the force to be reckoned with indeed. It did not take the Unspeakables long, however, to realize that their spells weren't really doing all that much to Draco, especially given they didn't seem to be allowed to use anything truly deadly so as not to ruin their investment in Project Bane. But the burlier ones sent into the fray seemed to understand that raw muscle and fists were actually more effective than magic in this case, and the tide rapidly turned in their favor. They had finally managed to reach the laboratory level with its horrific cavalcade of mutated and malformed experiments, when Draco turned to Hermione, shoved her forward in his place, and shouted to the both of them, "Cover me!" Hermione had only a split second to yelp, "Protego!" before her head was nearly taken off by an errant curse flung her way, and Harry called after Draco's retreating figure, "What the— Get back here, you idiot!" But alas, the idiot was gone, ducking into one of the labs and leaving Harry and Hermione to face down a dozen Unspeakables with more on the way. "I've got to say, I really don't think this is a healthy work environment for you," Harry huffed, casting a stick-fast hex on the shoes of the nearest Unspeakable, forcing those charging up behind them to either shimmy around them in the narrow hallway or collide with them in a heap of humanity. "I'd start looking for a new gig if I were you." "You know, I think I quite agree." She conjured a bunch of wizard crackers in the center of the approaching horde, and the blast sent a shockwave echoing in all directions. "I'm thinking of pursuing a career in a field that's a bit less dangerous, like a rumpet husbandry or venomous tentacular farming. Sounds promising, but I'm not sure you could secure a What the bloody hell?" What looked like a bird of some sort swooped through his legs, nearly knocking him off his feet and squawking loudly. Its strident screech made Harry wince, along with all the Unspeakables, and then there came the sound of soft pattering wing beats. Harry turned just in time to duck before a dozen more of the weird birds rushed by in a flurry of rainbow-hued plumage, and the corridor was filled with their irritating, twittering calls that seemed to crawl inside the ear canal and beat incessantly against the eardrums. "Whoopers!" Hermione shouted, hands clamped over her ears. "Don't listen to them! You'll go mad!" "What?" Harry shouted back, and she mimed for him to cover his ears as well. On the tails of the whoopers came a massive snake with far more heads than was appropriate, and Harry plastered himself against the wall, hoping it might find the burly Unspeakables on the front line more appealing targets than Harry's very stringy build. He closed his eyes tight in case this was some sort of mutant basilisk, and screamed when something grabbed his shirt collar. "Hermione! Run! Get out now!" "Take your own damn advice," Draco hissed, shoving Harry forward by the collar. "And open your eyes. There's clabbered pus all over the place now, and it'll eat through anything it touches." Harry blinked, glancing around. It was utter chaos, Draco having evidently set free every successful, and unsuccessful, experiment he could find as a distraction to clear the path for them. And it was working. A horde of little flying creatures that looked like doxies crossed with pixies were tearing out the hair of one unfortunate Unspeakable, while another lay unconscious on the floor as a sinister black-skinned humanoid creature with eyes like glowing coals crawled over them, unhinging its jaw and opening its mouth impossibly wide over the unspeakable's head. The whoopers had left behind a shower of feathers in all different colours, and the tiled floor was, indeed, pockmarked with sizzling little droplets of a mysterious goo that smelled like pine sap. "You're absolutely mad," Harry marvelled, a tiny bit terrified they'd just made things even worse. "I told you, I can't be held responsible for the beast's actions. Granger? Granger!" Hermione squeaked a response from the other side of some creature that looked like an erumpent crossed with a flitterbloom. Or maybe a devil's snare. Harry hadn't gotten best marks in herbology, and he did not want to check the massive beast too closely to find out. One hand waving in the air for their attention. "Fantastic idea, Draco! It's brought us a little time at least." "Pleased you approve," Draco said, waspish with stress. "Shall we take that precious time we've earned and get the fuck out of here?" Harry was more than all right with that, and as a trio they raced through the newly cleared hallways, dodging puddles of clabbered pus as they went. They reached a T-junction, though, and distant screams could be heard down all directions, making it difficult to determine which way they ought to head next. Harry turned to Hermione. "Which way next?" But Hermione was not there. Harry whirled around, scanning the hallway behind them, and found her stood before a doorway, chewing on a nail and looking like she was very much considering going through said door. Harry jogged back to meet her while Draco hissed, "Potter, get your bony ass back here!" He was one to talk. "What's wrong? Is that the way out?" No, it's not. Not really, but..." She sighed, and it came out a half-growl, half-huff as she began stomping up the stairs. "We have to." Have to what?" Harry looked back at Draco, helpless, then turned to call after Hermione. "What are you doing?" She stopped halfway up the staircase. "If we don't get something on these people, they'll just keep coming after us. Me to kill and Draco to capture. We need something that can shut this whole endeavour down, and we need to get it now, before they have a chance to destroy anything incriminating." Harry gestured back to Draco. "We've got a whole human being. Someone who can testify what's been done down here, and you too." Hermione shook her head. "You think anyone will listen to..." She dropped her voice. "To a Death Eater? You think they'll listen to someone who helped a Death Eater? I love that you have so much faith in the good of society, but having worked here, been a part of all of this, I know we need something ironclad. It can't just be testimony. We need actual evidence." She inclined her head up the stairs. 005's office is just this way. The archives will be guarded more securely than the Philosopher's Stone was, but no one would dare defile a director's private space. Harry groaned, turning back to Draco. "She says we..." "I fucking heard," Draco growled, grabbing Harry roughly by the shoulders and shoving him towards the staircase. "At this rate, I might eat someone after all." Hermione led the way from the front this time, hobbling as fast as she could on what had to be heavily battered legs. He was pretty sure he'd heard her seal a fracture earlier. He wondered what she knew about stimming internal bleeding. They were both of them going to wind up next to Ron at St. Mungo's before this was all said and done. But when Hermione drew up short, it was before an open archway. The door had already been dissolved and the nameplate was blank. Inside was an empty room, 4 grey walls, and nothing else. No, it was here, I'm certain of it." Are you sure?" Harry glanced around. The chaos had not reached this level yet, it seemed, and they were all alone. "I mean, all these doors look the same. Maybe you just got turned around." "I know it's here! I know it is!" Her voice was getting strident and choked, and Harry sympathized. He did, but they couldn't afford to get worked up like this right now. "I believe you, I do, but we don't have time to figure out what's happened. We'll have to take our chances escaping for now and live to fight another day. I can call in every favour I'm owed." "No one owes you any favours," she burbled, shoving her hair back from her face. "They're just nice to you because you're you, and everyone wants to be able to tell their friends at pub night that they did something for the boy who lived." Harry frowned. That was probably true, but she didn't have to come out and say it. Hermione was having about the worst day it was possible to have, though, so he decided to cut her some slack. "Then I'll give another few people a fantastic pub night tale. Either way, we'll make it work. Let's just go. We're tempting fate as it is. You can't make an office appear out of thin air, so if 005's hidden it or covered their tracks somehow, then there's..." "Oh, fuck!" Hermione yelled, hand going to her mouth. "Fuck!" And it sounded like a good fuck, so Harry raised his brows as if to say, well? She gave a little jump, twirled around, and whipped her wand through the air. Appare Vestigium! A shimmering bubble of magic emanated from the tip of her wand, expanding out around her and bringing into definition the thin, sparkling outline of 005's office, just barely visible, like a ghost of what had once been. "Look!" Hermione shouted, delighted, and pointed at the floor. Outlined in a similar ghostly sparkle was a set of footprints leading out the door and down the hallway. "Oh, they're heading for the entrance. Come on. Maybe we can still catch them if all those experimental horrors Draco set loose have held them up. Damn, if they make it out of the Ministry, there's next to no chance we'll be able to find them and shake them down for evidence. Then that sounds to me like we need to make sure they don't make it out of the Ministry." "Does this mean we can finally get the fuck out of here?" Draco called impatiently from the hallway, rapping the hilt of his wand against the door jamb for their attention. "I'm seriously about to start eating people, and I can't promise it won't be either of you." Harry darted past him, tugging on his elbow. "You wouldn't eat me. You like me." "I believe we've been over this before and concluded that I don't like you." "Yeah, well, we can revisit that once we finish our business here." The horde of horrors had helpfully scoured the hallways clean of any more unspeakables for them, such that they met no further challenge on their way back to the entrance room. Following 005's magically enhanced tracks, it was no difficult task to make their escape this time, and they found themselves spat out into the long, dark hallway leading back to the main lift. The bluebell flames flickered in their sconces, throwing cool shadows along the walls, and as the door to the Department of Mystery shut behind them, the cries and wails from either the unspeakables or the sand creatures forced to endure their experimentation, or both, faded away, such that the only sound reaching their ears now was the faint mechanical whirring of the lift itself. Someone was already inside, and on their way back up to the atrium. "Shit," Hermione spat, pointing to the fading tracks. "It's 005. We've just missed them. We'll have to take the stairs." "I think I'll take the lift all the same and meet you up there," Draco said darkly, marching toward the latticework doors and already beginning to bulk out into the dragon. "Shit! Stairs, now!" Harry grabbed Hermione's hand and jerked her forward. The last thing they needed was to get this far only to be crushed to death by a pissed-off animagus in mid-transformation. The echo of scraping metal and stone being crushed beneath nasty, ripping claws followed them up the empty stairwell as Draco forced himself into the lift shaft and began climbing. By the time they jogged, panting, from the stairwell, the atrium was in an even more chaotic state than the Department of Mysteries had been. The lanterns had been fired, casting the space in a warm, friendly glow that seemed more akin to a busy weekday morning than what was still the dead of night. And there were already a dozen or more unspeakables rushing for the apparition zone and disappearing with loud cracks that echoed around the hall. The Night Watch wizard was whipping his wand frantically, calling up silvery border collies and urging them to go fetch his superior because "there's a fudging dragon attacking the Ministry and I sure as hell don't get paid enough to slay it." This as Draco was clambering his way up through the lift shaft, bellowing in fury, and 005 was struggling to escape the lift doors before it had properly stopped at level 8, scrabbling their way through the halfway open lift doors. Their featureless, unspeakable mask had been lost in the confusion, and their wide-eyed panic was now writ large for all to see. Draco released a roar of heady accomplishment as he finally burst through into the atrium proper, hurling 005 into a red and white striped pushcart advertising a selection of 1,001 ice cream flavors as he clawed his way out onto the polished marble floor. Several of the fleeing unspeakables had summoned courage enough to turn back and brandish their wands in a feeble attempt to protect 005 from the massive creature that had just crawled up from the lift shaft and was presently attempting to knock them down like bowling pins with its lashing tail, which gave Harry and Hermione cover to attempt to apprehend 005 before they made it to the apparition zone. 005 had not risen to the rank they held in the Department of Mysteries by being stupid, though, and perhaps wisely recognizing that they could not hope to take on a Carpathian blackblood themselves. Not even with several of their department members attempting to provide aid, they quietly slipped into a darkened culvert and began attempting to disillusion themselves. Of course, they were a high-ranking Ministry employee. They had no reason to run, especially since Hermione had no evidence proving their involvement in anything untoward, and Draco was Draco, so who was going to take his word over a department head's? They didn't need to escape. They just needed to wait long enough for Draco to be brought down, and Harry and Hermione rounded up for questioning about the state of the Department of Mysteries, and then it would be their word against 005's and the entire rest of the departments. "You're right. You definitely need that evidence," Harry said darkly. "Are you prepared to get your hands dirty if it comes to it, though?" Hermione set her expression to one of grim determination. No, but I've done rather a lot over the years I wasn't prepared for, and a good portion of it was things I would never have thought myself capable of, for better or worse. That bitch fucked with my family, though. Harry lifted a brow at her language. And that's just not done. They left Draco to handle the riffraff, fanning out to flank 005. Harry hadn't had a proper duel since Voldemort, now that he thought about it, and he probably could have gone the rest of his life never squaring off against a villain in that manner again, but here he was. There's nowhere left to run, 005, Hermione called out, and from their culvert 005 jolted, realizing only now they'd been made. You've got 2 well-trained wizards on either side of you, a rather sizable dragon who'd very much like to make your formal acquaintance, and a good 100 feet of open space between you and your only route out of here. You're welcome to make a run for it if you've decided hiding probably won't work out for you, but my friend and I both have a pretty good aim, and that dragon's hungry. She levelled her wand at 005. Would you like to surrender quietly? Or should we see who's a quicker draw? 005 released a bracing huff. Always were too clever for your own good. I had high hopes for you, 072. You could have been a fine example for the department. Why you would throw away a promising career to save that is beyond me. He and his ilk would have slaughtered you given half a chance. He and his ilk tried, and it didn't take. Sinking to their level doesn't prove we're better than them. It only proves we're no better than them. And don't lecture me about having high hopes. I genuinely thought we were doing something in essence, something that would change the world. Oh, we were. A change you clearly didn't have the stomach to see through. Countless man-hours of research ruined, because you couldn't stand by and quietly watch as we were far kinder to that miserable little cretin and his friends than they were to me and mine. Revenge is no excuse for torturing someone, Harry started, and 005 cackled. Oh, that is rich, coming from you, Harry Potter. And Harry flushed, because, all right, they kind of had a point. And apropos of your earlier offer, 072, I think I'd like to see who's a quicker draw after all. They snapped their wand in a flourishing movement, and Harry and Hermione both threw up shield charms, but 005 wasn't casting at them. They were casting at the floor, which began crumbling away beneath their feet as 005 laid into it with a bellowed, "Defodio!" Harry dived off to the side as a plume of dust and debris went up and spells began to be traded rapid fire amidst the chaos. He couldn't see shit through the smoke, though, and didn't want to fling spells about willy-nilly, wary of hitting Hermione. He wadded up the invisibility cloak, covering his nose and mouth so he didn't inhale too much of the dust, and took a beat to reflect on the fact that he was using one of the vaunted Hallows as a glorified air filter. It felt like using the Elder Wand to dislodge a stubborn drain clog. Through sheer luck, he managed to find the Fountain of Magical Brethren in the smoke and huddled behind it, where he found the Night Watch wizard already pinned down and weeping with relief at Harry's appearance. "Oh, what's going on? This is only my 3rd night on the job. I haven't even got my first paycheck yet. Is it always like this?" I mean, honestly, it's kind of been like this both times I've visited, so... The poor wizard blanched and then slipped into a dead faint. Good. One less innocent bystander to worry about getting caught in any crossfire. From across the atrium, Draco released a roar of frustration, and Harry heard the telltale whomp, whomp, whomp of him beating the air with his boat-sail-sized wings. He grabbed tight to the fountain's edge, bracing for the gale-force gusts coming his way, and sighed in relief as the air cleared, revealing Hermione and 005 in the midst of a nasty back-and-forth that looked like it could go either way. Harry scrambled around the massive hole in the atrium floor, wand in hand and ready to provide backup, and Draco, who seemed to have either eaten or otherwise dispatched the unspeakables who'd been harassing him, began scrabbling across the polished tile to do the same, claws clacking brightly on the marble. 005 tossed an expulso Harry's way to ward him off, but it flew wide and exploded the head of the fountain's centaur sculpture. Draco shrieked in fury at the goal and flared his wings wide, their span so great they easily covered both Hermione and Harry once he'd drawn close enough. He bared his fangs in threat, but 005 did not seem intimidated in the least. Hermione pushed her hair back from her face as the 3 of them converged on 005. She rubbed at her cheek, smearing a streak of blood that had been trickling down from a cut across her temple, then drew herself up tall, wand brandished. "I'll ask again, one last time. Will you lay down your wand and yield, or will you have us take it from you by force?" This close, Harry thought 005 looked like they could be someone's grandmother. They looked older than Andromeda even, and more the type to ask if you took 2 lumps of sugar or 3 with your tea, rather than to be directing burly thugs to use unforgivables on their own subordinates. Harry wondered if they had children, or grandchildren. Maybe they did, or had, and that was the entire point of this sick business. Years later, and still they were left dealing with the repercussions of that fucking pointless war. 005 eyed them all in sequence, with Draco earning the darkest glare of them all. Harry felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Animals were at their most dangerous when cornered, and humans were no exception. He tightened his grip on his wand, feeling a spike of adrenaline flood his bloodstream and setting his heart to thrumming in his chest. This person had tortured Draco for reasons Harry could kind of understand, and Hermione for reasons he couldn't, and they clearly still believed, perhaps with well-founded faith, that they would come out the other end of this smelling of roses. 005's thin lips twisted into a toothy smile. Unfortunately for you, 072, we just learned only moments ago that I'm a quicker draw than you. Harry was ready for it, Expelliarmus on his lips, but he'd been expecting 005 to strike at Hermione, and suddenly their casting arm wasn't where he thought it would be, swinging wide overhead as an arc of sickly green magic whipped out and struck Draco square in his heavily armored chest. The dragon's screeching roar mingled with the echoed cry of Avada Kedavra. Time slowed to a syrupy crawl. Hermione shrieked in horror, casting a reflexive bodybind on 005 and sending them to their knees, where they toppled onto one shoulder, face pressed into the cold marble tile. Their grin of triumph was frozen on their features as their eyes, unblinking, took in the terror they'd just wrought. Draco reared up onto his hind legs and seemed to freeze in place, wings spread impossibly wide, and Harry thought for one brief glimmering moment that the dragon had shrugged this off too. Fucking wizard's bane indeed. And then everything went limp, and Draco staggered in place before falling so slowly, slamming into the fountain of magical brethren as the flooring shook under the massive weight of his body slumping to the ground, unmoving. Time unstuck itself, and then Harry was running at breakneck speed, trainers slapping against the dust and debris-covered flooring as he scrambled to Draco's side. He was already casting Renovate before he was even in range, heart in his throat and fucking up the verbal components. The creature's body was still, too still. But that didn't mean anything. Of course a curse of that magnitude would knock the wind out of him. Of course it would. But it had taken the combined forces of most of the Department of Mysteries just to put him under stasis before. It would take more, so much more, than one offhand unforgivable from a bitter old witch to bring him down for good. And he made sure Draco heard this, voice quavering as he continued to cast a litany of spells between lectures at the cold, dead carcass lying before him that was not cold, or dead, or a carcass. I wasted my entire fucking summer putting you back to rights, you literal knob, so wake the fuck up and give me back my fucking Weasley jumper. He gave the dragon's soft belly an angry kick and screamed, Wake up! What good's your stupid magical resistance if you can't shrug off one measly little killing curse, huh? I mean, I did it twice. So wake your lazy fucking ass up. He sank to his knees and began shaking one of Draco's massive front limbs, now limp in death. And to his horror, the movement caused a handful of scales to slough off. He stared at his palms, and the dull black scales stuck to them, no longer shimmering with that opalescent oil-slick sheen, and shook them violently, causing the scales to flutter to the ground. He sprang to his feet, taking several staggering steps back and shaking his head. This wasn't real. This wasn't happening. He'd gotten concussed in the fight earlier, and he'd fallen unconscious. Draco had taken him to St. Mungo's against his better judgment, and now the healers had forced some vile but effective potion down his throat that would leave him feeling right as rain come morning. But not before he'd had to struggle through a series of ever darker nightmares where he tried to save Draco one more time and failed. A breeze he could not feel but could see the effects of began whispering through the atrium, whisking away the dust and smoke still hanging in the air and whipping the scales that had fallen from Harry's hands into little funnels. Harry stared ahead, numb, and felt his eyes grow hot as everything took on a soft blur. He'd almost forgotten what it felt like losing a friend.
We aren't friends.
And worse, he'd almost forgotten what it felt like losing them when it was all your fault.
You can't save everyone.
It was kind of funny when you thought about it. He had one spell he was known for, and the one time, second time, it had mattered, he hadn't been able to pull it off. Draco, at least, would have found it funny, if it hadn't been what had gotten him killed. The breeze was strengthening, beginning to whip at Harry's hair, and he glanced around, unsure of where it had even come from. Countermeasures of some sort from the Ministry, perhaps? Too little too late, if so. More scales began to flake away from the dragon's corpse, skittering around the atrium like dead leaves on the wind, and then whole patches were being ripped off, and Harry's heart clenched. "Don't fucking do this!" he growled, frustration choking him. He clenched his wand, white-knuckled tight, and stepped close, but he didn't know what he thought he could do. He wanted to cover the body, do something until this wind died down. Give this miserable sod some fucking decency and death, at least. The atmospheric charms always seemed to be on the fritz here, and he recalled there being a spell that could restore them, but the incantation was about the furthest thing from his mind in this moment. But more and more scales continued to either flake away or dissolve into dust and debris, and Harry reached down to gather as many as he could. There wouldn't be anything left to bury at this rate, and why had Draco chosen now of all times to grow a spine? He wasn't a Gryffindor, he was a slimy little snake who cowered in the shadows while people with bigger hearts and smaller brains than him risked their lives for him. This was what you got reduced to when you tried to be something you weren't. A lumpy sack of meat, lying cold on the floor. An errant scale flew into his mouth and he spat it out, but then another smacked him in the forehead and another hit his cheek, and then there was a veritable torrent of them whirling around him, pelting him from all sides and lodging themselves in his hair and the folds of his clothes and all sorts of places scales were neither needed nor wanted. He batted them away furiously, shaking his head until they fell around him in a shower of little black flakes. And when he was able to open his eyes again, he saw that the dragon's carcass had been stripped away by the whipping wind, reduced to a pitiful shell that lay cracked open and empty like a chrysalis. No guts, no innards, no bones or blood or muscle, only a human body, curled up atop a nest of black scales that clashed fiercely with his white blonde hair and emerald Weasley jumper. Breathing. Harry let out a sound he'd never heard himself make before, hadn't thought he could make, honestly, and rushed to Draco's side, foregoing all care and gentleness for someone who it seemed had just come back from the dead, and instead shaking his shoulders violently. "Draco? Draco!" He pressed his ear to Draco's chest, just in case he'd imagined the gentle up and down. There was a faint but definite ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum that Harry could have listened to for hours. He drew back and gave Draco a light slap on the cheek. "Wake up, oh great worm. If I'm not getting any sleep tonight, you aren't either." Draco grimaced, features scrunching up into a hideous visage, and Harry didn't think he'd ever been so grateful to see someone look so ugly. He twisted his head away. "That's physical assault. I'm filing charges." "They never convict me. I'm Harry fucking Potter." "Ugh," Draco said, and Harry wasn't entirely sure which part of the interaction it was directed toward. "What the hell happened? I feel like I got run over by a herd of hippogriffs." He braced a hand against his forehead and winced. "God, my skull feels like it's about to split open." "Welcome to my world," Harry chuckled, throat still a bit tight. "And it was nothing, really." He shrugged. "I mean, you may have just taken a killing curse to the chest and shrugged it off, but, other than that, nothing of note." Draco blinked at him with wide grey eyes for several long seconds, then closed them again and exhaled slowly. "Oh, is that all?" He leaned forward, shifting his legs under him, clearly intent on getting to his feet. Harry tried to help him, but Draco batted his hand away, and then made a hasty grab for him again when he wobbled unsteadily and his ankles buckled under him. "I thought I'd done something amazing." Harry thought he had too, but it wasn't a good idea to puff a Slytherin up too much, so he said instead, "Afraid it was just the black blood being the fantastic magical creature that it is. I don't think you get to take credit for it. Well, it's my genes that made me turn into the damn thing in the first place. I ought to get some credit." He let Harry fit his shoulder under Draco's arm as they hobbled as a pair over to where Hermione had positioned herself at a respectful distance watching over the frozen 005, perhaps thinking it wasn't her place to intrude on Harry while he mourned. A dark part of him agreed. She'd been able to save him. Harry hadn't. "Shouldn't your parents get the credit in that case?" "And as their sole heir, I shall accept all credit on their behalf. Do you know nothing of wizarding beneficiary law. He leaned into Harry, stumbling a bit drunkenly over his own feet. I was hoping they might start calling me the dragon who lived. You know, maybe start my own little fanatical cult following. It's always been a dream of mine. Oh, so you were just jealous of me in school, then? You didn't think I didn't deserve the attention. You just wanted it for yourself. Good gad, man, it took you 11 years to figure that out? I know you're no Ravenclaw, but still. He used Harry's shoulder to lever himself up to stand a bit straighter, and Harry saw why. They weren't alone in the atrium anymore. Others who were not unspeakables, were starting to arrive. Soon, some of them would stop simply gawping at the destruction and work up the courage to confront them about the state of the place. First the Cruciatus curse, and now the killing curse. It's 2 unforgivables I've shaken off now. Maybe someday you'll make it a trifecta so you never have to worry about this bullshit happening again. Draco had nothing to say to that, though, only gave a mock bow to Hermione when they drew close enough to speak. Please, hold your applause. It's Goshen public. Her eyes were sparkling with unshed tears, and she smiled. I'm very glad to see you're still around to engage in such witty repartee. Well, for my next act, I think I'd like to disappear. He cast a furtive glance to someone who looked very much like an aura who'd been rousted from his bed before the crack of dawn and was presently marching their way. Will that be a problem? 005's paralyzed body lay near the pit they'd carved into the atrium's floor. Harry kind of wanted to kick them into it. He might have if Hermione hadn't been there. Draco, he firmly believed, would have asked to help. Hermione reached into her pocket, palming a glowing glass orb. She gave it a little shake, and a silvery liquid sloshed around inside. Pocket pensive. I reckon there's enough juicy memories stored in here to set a few things right. And she too had spotted the sleep-deprived aura who was waving them down now. Perhaps it's for the best we head back to Harry's cottage for the evening, morning, whatever it is, and turn ourselves in later. Harry quite agreed with that idea, and as a unit they quickly made their way, dragging Draco between them, to the apparition zone and disappeared with a crack.